Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Happy Black Friday!
Woo! I actually don't even care about Black Friday.
I know, I hate Black Friday. I don't think you and I have ever done Black Friday shopping.
We've done it on occasion, but we've never enjoyed it. And I don't know, it's never really been all that beneficial
I think you're right.
to us.
I remember doing it once.
Yeah.
We normally completely avoid going out into public on Black Friday at all.
Well, and it used to be, I think, that they had just like a limited number of things. So you had to show up early in the morning, get in line, and know exactly what you were going looking for. It's not quite like that anymore.
All I know is when I see the news of people literally fighting over shit in a like Walmart or wherever for Black Friday toys and whatnot, I'm like, I'm not willing to shop with that many active amygdalas. Happy Black Friday. I hope y'all enjoyed your Thanksgiving. Obviously, it's not Black Friday for us, but this episode is airing on Black Friday 2022.
So hopefully you enjoyed your Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I do care about that.
Yes, and we've decided to boycott traditional Thanksgiving. We are not making the traditional fixings because I looked at Mason and said, I don't want to. We're going simple. We're doing crock pot. But the kids did beg me. When I told Katie that today, she said, Mom, we have to have pumpkin pie. And I was like, fine, I can do a pumpkin pie. So we're going to probably do pumpkin pie, apple pie. We'll do the pies. The Westbrooks are celebrating Thanksgiving
pies,
with apple pie, pumpkin pie, and pecan pie. Those are our family faves. And something totally laid back in the crock pot, and that's it. Like, we're just having extra dessert for Thanksgiving this year, which I'm really excited for because it means less work for me. I think it'll also be our first Thanksgiving without Eric home, hun. I don't think we've ever done Thanksgiving or Christmas without Eric before. Y'all know what that means?
Are you going to survive?
No, I'm going to cry a lot.
You have to
probably.
cry a little bit?
I am. I'm going to cry a little bit. I've actually done really good as Eric has transitioned into adulthood. But every now and then I get a little weepy and I'm like, oh, I miss my baby. But he's not a baby anymore. He's like 21, has a solid job working for BMW, is loving it.
Yeah. He's done good.
He's done great.
You done good, Mama.
You did good too, Daddy. So he was the easy child. Eric, if you're listening to this, I will forever and always say you were definitely by far the easiest of our 7 children. Don't let it go to your head. All righty. So today is the Why Sarah Left the Church mini-series grand finale.
Ooh. Grand finale.
You know, Mason, as I was writing the notes, just like the outline for today, I am amazed at how far we've come. Yeah, just where we were in our marriage then to where we are now, where I was emotionally then to where I am now, where I was professionally as a mama. I mean, a lot of things have changed for our family in this time period.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think really for the better. In pretty much every way for me. I am so much happier. And I know that's hard for you to hear, isn't it, Mason?
It has been hard for me to hear. I don't think it is still. Like initially, it was certainly hard for me to hear that you were happier without the church and with all the changes that had gone on. But I'm used to it now, and I'm happy for you. And I think that in general, that has been positive for us. I'm still, I don't know, every once in a while I still mourn the loss of what I had, but...
In what way? Like, what makes it hard for you?
It was simpler then. I believed strongly in the church organization that I belonged to, that was a big part of my life. It was, I had a focus on how I wanted to raise kids and how I wanted them to be involved in things. And of course, a lot of that is gone now. We still do some of those things, but for the most part, that strong, intense focus was easy. It was busy. It in ways it was hard, but you knew what the answer was. You knew the
right. There wasn't a lot of thinking that had to go into it. There wasn't. It was obey and
well, it was either can we do
and
this tonight or can we not? Because there was no question. Well, is this the right thing to do? It was really just can we accomplish this tonight or can we not?
What do you mean accomplish this tonight?
Youth. Like if you're going to go to youth on Wednesday nights, if other stuff was going on, it was really just a question, can we do youth or do we need to, do this other stuff?
Yeah, no, it was normally we have youth that night. So unless this is like something that can't be rescheduled for any other night, like the church kind of trumped everything. Always, almost always. Yeah. I would say that, one of the things that we joke about as parents is, if only I had like an owner's manual as a parent, or if only I had a how-to for life. And really one of the things about high demand organizations is that they provide a very clear structure. And within the Mormon church, there's a lot of that black and white thinking. It's very much a reward-based token economy type system, although the rewards that you are going to get is going to be, notoriety and social acceptance, and then some existential mansion and blessings and whatnot. But it was very clear. Like I agree. It took the decision making out.
It did. Well, to some degree, of course.
Yeah, and then it was really easy to bypass emotions because it was, well, I've done what I'm supposed to do. I'm handing it over to God and just ignoring, whatever now. So
also true.
Yeah. So
also true. So tell us what we're going to talk about tonight. Or today or this morning, whenever you're listening
for us it's tonight, and the daughter and her bestie are babysitting the little kids. It is freezing cold today in Missouri, y'all, and Katie, who is 14, was at the grocery store with me earlier, and she said, what would be so cool, Mom? It would be so cool if our family could go camping in this weather. And I looked at her and I said, nope.
You're crazy.
Yep. And then she said, well, can I do it by myself? Like, I can't wait till I'm old enough to go camping by myself. And I was like, hon, we have 15 acres. Knock yourself out. We got a tent. We got everything you need. And so she called her best friend, and they are doing a freeze out sleepover. I think it's supposed to get into the 20s tonight.
Is it?
20 degrees Fahrenheit. Like
find out how cold they are going to be.
26 degrees Fahrenheit or something. They're sleeping with Akron the dog. So we have an Australian Shepherd. 21 degrees is the low for tonight. And they're going to be sleeping with the Australian Shepherd in order to keep themselves warm. And what that actually means is they're probably not going to get very much sleep at all. And whoa. And we're going to have two girls on the couch, the floor, in Katie's room, like coming in and out of the house probably in the middle of the night. But that's my estimation. Kids are so much fun. Okay. So yeah, we're going to talk today about the final years leading up to when I finally said, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. So if you remember from our last episode, I got very heated. My amygdala definitely got in there, blaming the church for a lot of the increase in suicide in the LGBTQIA population. Also, content warning, we are going to be talking about suicidal ideation again tonight because that was definitely part of my story. And so anyway... So in 2015 was for me experientially where I no longer believed that the prophet was what he said he was or what the apostles said or what the apostles claimed they were. I did still find a lot of inspiration in a lot of the general conference talks, but I really became filtered. So everything the church or the leaders of the church, everything they were saying was coming to me through a filter, and my mind had shifted to a place where I was teaching gospel doctrine, and I was asking some really hard questions of the class. So Mason, in this time period, so we moved shortly after 2015. So in 2016, we moved to Killeen, Texas, to
summer.
Fort Hood in the summer. Of 2016 in the summer. We were in Killeen for a little less than a year when you got called to be the bishop of the ward.
It was the summer of 17, so a year.
Okay, so about a year, and I was teaching seminary again during that time period. The first year we were there, I was the young women's president of the ward, and I was really grateful. We had a really good bishop who I love to this day. His wife taught me how to hula. His wife gave me a love of kayaking. She was, 20 years older than me. But that's like a lot of my closest friends are much older than me.
Yeah. You've always been a little more mature than your age.
Aw. Does that mean I get to be the grumpy, don't give a shit, no boundaries earlier in life? Like, 90-year-old women who just don't care. Dang it. All righty. Mason says no, I got to care. So anyway, so I served as the young women's president, and I really appreciated the bishop that I served under because he let the women in our ward council have a voice, and he took our ideas. It was almost, if the women say it'll work, we're doing it the women's way. And that was really the first experience because that I'd had with that in a bishop. The last bishop I had served under when I was in leadership, so when I was the primary president in North Carolina, that would have been when we first got to North Carolina, so 2009. He was in the medical field. He was used to being a boss, and he also a very good bishop. I do not at all want to discredit him. He's a good man. He was a good bishop. I felt like he did a really good job, but he knew what he wanted, and he listened to our ideas, absolutely, but you knew that there was definitely that strong patriarchy. He knew how to run a business, whereas with our bishop in Killeen, when we first got there, I think he was feeling a little burned out. He'd been in leadership for a long time, but he had learned to trust the women of the ward. And I absolutely loved the fact that for the first time, I felt like not only did my voice get listened to, but that it had meaning, that it was valued within the council. I didn't like with the bishop in North Carolina, I almost felt like I was a little afraid of him. Like he was my dad, like do what is right. Don't mess up. Because, and he was really good at not talking to you. So North Carolina bishop number 1 only came to you with concerns if something was wrong. So the fact that he didn't talk to me very often was probably a good thing for me. But that's just who he was. Whereas with the Killeen bishop, he was, okay, Sarah, I'm going with your idea. I think that's great. I hear what you're saying. Let me know how it's working. And when I would come back and say, hey, this is how it's gone. Like he definitely gave me the reins to be a leader and to actually have a lot of the final decision making. Of course, from a Mormon view, he still had to put his final stamp, but his final stamp was, we're doing it Sarah's way, which of course I loved, duh.
Really?
Why wouldn't I?
And you're right. He was burned out too.
Yeah. Well, and we knew that he was going to be,
contributed to that.
Yeah. He was at the end of his, bishop sentencing there. And so we knew a new bishop was coming, and we knew Mason was going to be the next bishop. Like, looking around the ward at the men who were, Mormon worthy, qualified to do it, that also had careers that could support it. Because we were in a military warden at Fort Hood. We didn't see our men very often at Fort Hood. Just there's a high deployment What is
Yeah.
housed there? I can't even remember because you're in the hospital. What
The
is
first
it?
Cav.
Thank you. It's the cavalry units that
There's
are
also
there.
an armored division there. It's
Yeah.
a huge movement
Yeah.
place. There's always people deployed from Fort Hood.
Yeah. And if they're not deployed, they're in some crazy long training. And so as we were looking around with you in the medical field, where we were in life, the callings that we had, we kind of knew it was coming. So it was not a surprise to us at all when the call was extended to Mason to be the bishop. Do you remember, Mason? We actually, like, the stake president was like, oh, I want to talk to you. And we had gone to Walmart or HEB. And I was like, so are you ready to be the bishop? Because you know that's what he's going to ask. And do you remember that, Mason?
Yeah, vaguely.
And we kind of talked about it, and you said, yeah, I mean, I feel ready, but I also kind of feel a little unworthy, kind of like I'm the only option. And we kind of talked about, well, if you were the only option, it's probably why the Lord put you in that ward, was because he needed you there. And so you got called to be the bishop. And for those of you who don't know, the call for bishop is approved by the prophet himself, by the first presidency of the church. And so on your call to be the bishop, you got a little letter that had the prophet's signature. Was it Monson or Nelson at that point? Do you remember? I don't even remember.
It was 17, so Monson.
It would have been Monson's signature. Probably during the time when he was having some dementia issues. He probably didn't make that decision. But it is supposed to be coming directly from the prophet, which was a little bit humbling for us. But then I was really struggling with that because I was like, wow, I can't believe it. But then also, this makes sense. Because I really struggled when your dad got called to be the bishop in his ward in Virginia, not because I was jealous, but because of the way he had treated me. I just didn't feel like that was a godly thing.
A prophet is not without honor except in his own country.
Yeah.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Yeah, I knew all of your, not all of your dad's flaws, but I knew a lot of your dad's shortcomings and flaws. And so it was really hard for me. Whereas with you, I didn't have those same reservations. I knew that you loved people. I knew that you were very respectful to me. You weren't an abusive person ever. Like, I don't feel like you were ever harsh or over disciplinary. Like, you loved the gospel. You loved the people. You were always striving to do good.
Aw.
I know. You're so hot and sexy.
Oh, yeah. You didn't mention that part. That's good. Wow. I like this. Keep going.
You like all these compliments.
No, actually,
anyway,
it makes me very uncomfortable. Move on.
Yeah. But we also got a letter that in that letter, it basically said that if you had a spouse as an auxiliary president, which was me, I was the young women's president, that she had to be released. And so I got released within the first week or two. So like your very first order of business was find counselors and a new young women's president. Because I could not be the young women's president. And I think you got me released like the following Sunday after you were called. It was within the first 2 Sundays I got released.
Yeah.
And I was called to be the gospel doctrine teacher. And I think the people in Killeen really liked me as the gospel doctrine teacher because I made them think. I did not follow the script. I mean, I stayed within the boundaries, but I didn't teach the same thing over and over. It was not mind numbing. It was not boring. And we used to joke, the way to tell if your gospel doctrine teacher is doing a good job or not is by how full or empty the hallways were. And when I was teaching gospel doctrine, I felt very honored because the hallways were empty and the chairs in my class were full.
When you'd spent a few years, you said seminary.
Right.
I was a Sunday school president, stake Sunday school president, and we'd done a lot of training on how to actually teach in the way that really helps people learn.
Well, and at that point, I was, an independently licensed mental health professional.
Yeah.
I mean, I was teaching on different levels and working with people, and it was a good fit, and
Smarty
really
pants.
enjoyed that calling. Well, and I agree with you, Mason. I feel like we both do a really good job teaching in that setting.
Yeah.
Really good. And one of the things that was difficult for me is that my patriarchal blessing said that I would be, blessed. I would be called blessed for my ability to explain the gospel to people, and that teaching was one of my strengths. And I had always felt very honored by that blessing, that, quote unquote gift, that I'd gotten in my patriarchal blessing. So anyway, I enjoyed that calling, and I think, we had melded well with that ward. And so even though I didn't believe the prophet to be what he said he was, even though there were a lot of holes there, I felt very strongly that I could make positive changes within the church for good, that I was going to be the catalyst, or one of the many catalysts in my local congregation to, equal rights and love the LGBT population. And, we're going to reduce the teenage suicide risk, and we're going to help people heal. And, I was very precocious and what's the word I'm looking for? Idealistic. Yeah, I was very idealistic that this organization that I loved, it didn't have to be true in the way that they were claiming it to be true, but that it could be good and a huge force for good in people's lives. It just needed some tweaking, and I wanted to be a part of finding solutions and healing the organization, which is really common. Like if you listen to Mormon Stories, John Dehlin talks about that. I think I've heard RFM and Bill Reel say that before. In fact, I think Bill Reel's initial start of the Mormon discussion
His
podcast.
First podcast, he was still an active member.
And he was a bishop as well. Yeah, like how can we do this? Like, we've gone off the rails somewhere. Let's get back in line.
Right.
And
can we fix it internally?
Right. And unfortunately for me, the answer was no. I couldn't.
And for a lot of those people that you just mentioned, the answer ended up being no, I can't do it from the inside.
Well, but I still have very close relationships with so many of those people, the people I served with in that ward. I hated Killeen, Texas. Really, I hated Fort Hood. Fort Hood is the only post that we've been to that I did not like. Yeah. Every other post, I loved everything about it. Now, having said that, Darnall Army Medical Center is probably one of my favorite hospital systems within the Army that you worked for while we were there. It was an awesome chain of command. It was a good hospital. I really appreciated that. I don't appreciate the Central Texas weather at all. So it's hot and humid and icky all the time, all year round. Allergies were really bad for me, but I loved that ward. And that ward, I felt at home in it. I felt loved in it. However, it was a little bit isolating being the bishop's wife because, people were getting to know me as the bishop's wife. And what I had found was the people that were in the ward while I was the young women's president that I'd gotten to know when you got called to the bishop, those relationships didn't change at all. But after you got called to be the bishop, as new people moved in, there seemed to be this kind of divide. Like I was untouchable and friendships were really complicated and difficult. Yeah. But I feel like I had a really positive impact on a lot of people. I did tick one lady off because I wouldn't let her shame others in a class before. And then that kind of went downhill for her because complaining about the gospel doctrine teacher to the bishop when they're married. Yeah. So anyway, and I felt like our friendship was a huge plus for the ward too, that having a bishop and a bishop's wife where we were such good friends and really close was really helpful. Now, having said all of that, I also felt incredibly lonely while I was there. So I was surrounded by people who loved me. I loved the ward, but it didn't shake the fact that I felt very, very alone. I felt very, very lonely. And there was a lot of resentment starting to grow within me because you were never home. Like the way that our life had gone was we got to San Antonio in 2014, 2013 for anesthesia school. And then we went back to North Carolina for your residency. So I was starting to feel alone. But yeah, you had gone to medical school, then medical residency. You'd only been out of medical residency for a little while when you get this call to then be the bishop.
Yeah.
A little less than a year. We were just beginning to reconnect after so we were married, but Mason definitely took kind of like this disengagement, detachment break from the family because he was so busy studying. The program was so intense in the Army, the anesthesia program, that you weren't really there for us emotionally, and you weren't there for us a whole lot physically either, simply because of the demands of medical school in the Army. And just as we were beginning to recover from that, you get called to be the bishop. And just as I think we've figured out a good rhythm with you as the bishop, you get deployed to Afghanistan. And y'all, one of the things that people don't realize is that in these military wards, if your deployment is semi-short, you don't get released as the bishop. Mason served as the bishop from Afghanistan in a war zone. You were in a war zone, and you were the bishop of our ward at home. And that was not abnormal. The bishop in the Harker Heights ward neighboring us, I think, had been deployed as well for
9 months.
For 9 months.
He was gone for twice as long as I was and stayed the
Yeah,
bishop.
you were gone for right around 5 months, right? Mm-hmm. From the time you left our house to the time you came back, it was about 5 months. And so that was really hard for me, just because I was alone. I had been a basically married single mama for years, and we had adopted Abby, so we now had 2 special needs children. In that time frame, we also adopted Tyler, who was traumatized, and so I was dealing with opening my own practice, and so yeah, it was a pretty intense time, and I felt very lonely. I was overbusy, overwhelmed, and I felt alone, even though I was surrounded.
Yeah.
You served as the bishop. When was it that it was 2019, right? So you had served for about 2 years before.
Almost 2 years, yeah, because you guys left in April.
Okay, so Mason had served as the bishop for almost 2 years. And then it was coming up time. It's one of the things with the Army is, about 2 to 5 years is about the average stay somewhere. That's a big average. And for us, it was about 3 years. And for us to stay in Killeen, we could have stayed in Killeen because Eric needed to finish out high school. We could have gotten some stabilization to stay.
I already had it, yeah. So we could have stayed.
But our concern was Brig. Brig was really struggling. He had a psychotic break that was very embarrassing in front of his peers, and he was being bullied horrifically in school and in the neighborhood. He had embarrassed himself in the neighborhood and at school, and he had ended up having to go into treatment right about the same time, Mason. I think Brig was in treatment for most of your deployment, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
Around that same time period, yeah. So Brig was just really struggling, and once he came out of treatment and went back to school, the bullying was just so bad. And with his special needs, we talked to the school, and we were really concerned about Brig's ability to have his needs met in a high school as big as Killeen High School. It was a huge high school. I mean, school districts in Texas, the 6A or whatever, 5A, 6A schools, they are enormous. I think like Allen High School has almost 10,000 students in it. I think it's basically like a college. But yeah, the high schools in Killeen were somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 students per high school, depending on which campus you were at. If memory is serving me correctly there.
Yeah, I think we had about 4.
Yeah, it was huge. It just a huge high school, and they were building another one. And we were concerned about Brig getting lost in that system. And so we went ahead and accepted orders, knowing that wherever we went again, we did not want to move again, because by that time we would have high schoolers for, until we were done raising kids.
Yeah, pretty much.
And we didn't want to move our kids in high school. And we were really concerned about moving Eric in high school. And it was awful for Eric. Eric really struggled because we moved him right at the end of his junior year. And then he did his senior year here. And one of the things that's been really difficult for him is that not only was it just a difficult transition, but then COVID hit and he got a head injury with wrestling that he doesn't even remember a good chunk of his senior year because of the severity of a concussion he got while wrestling at the state tournament his senior year for the high school here in Missouri. But we got our orders. We talked to HR or whoever it is in the military, and it looked like everything was going to be fine. And so we went ahead and moved to Missouri, expecting orders to follow very shortly thereafter. That, big miscommunication, not really even a miscommunication.
And just rule number 1 with Army moves, you never move until you have orders in hand. And
right. And we took that risk.
Yeah.
We moved before we had the orders in hand. But we took that risk because we felt like it was what was best for our kids.
Yeah.
And really it came down to, I would rather get the IEPs for mostly Briggs IEP situated in a new school district. So that way he could start high school with everything in place and ready to go, and medical providers.
Right.
And we could take the
better
summer.
for the kids.
Right. We could take the summer to adjust to the new environment.
Yep.
And so we moved in April. We bought a house, and we were expecting Mason to be able to join us about 30 days after we got here, based on what the conversations had been with whoever it is in the military. Is it HR? It's not HR in the military. What is it called? Oh, it's HR.
Mm-hmm.
So HR in the military. And there was a mistake, and they could not move him. And so Mason did not join us for about 11 months. It was right at about 11 months. You joined us in March the following year.
Yeah, end of February. And you guys signed papers on the house on the 1st of April.
Yeah, our house is the April Fool's house. We love it. We've been there now for this coming April will be 4 years. It's the longest we've ever lived in one house consecutively. I think we've already surpassed that. I think that this house is the longest house we have lived in consecutively in our entire marriage. The only one that beats it is the one in North Carolina, which we lived in for 5 years.
There was a break in the middle.
But there was a good solid break there in the middle.
Year and a half,
Yeah. Alrighty. So I moved to Missouri, and I'm alone. So at this point, I have 7 children. All of them are living at home. Brig has special needs. Abby has special needs. Landon is struggling with severe anxiety. Katie did not handle being separated from you well at all.
She's a daddy's girl for
Katie
sure.
is our daddy's girl. Yep. And then Tyler was just struggling because he came to us from a very traumatic history. He was almost 3 when we took custody of him. And so we were dealing with some challenging behaviors as he adjusted to our home. And Tyler took a long time to feel comfortable in our home. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with we had him, things were going well, and then we moved. We had to start over again for him. But our goal was we're going to move, and we're not moving again until our children are done with high school. Right. And so we chose...
If at all.
Right, if at all, which is why we said, okay, where do we want to go? These are the options available to us in the Army. Out of those options, we want 4 seasons. We really liked the landscape of Missouri. We have friends here that we had come to visit every summer, and we really liked how green it was. And the cost of living here was a lot more reasonable than, say, Colorado, which was, I think, the other choice. And then North Carolina was our other choice. So we were kind of looking at North Carolina, Missouri, and Colorado. And our issue with North Carolina was we were done with the hurricanes and the tornadoes. In our 5 years, we owned that home for 10 years. We did 3 floods, 1 tornado, and 1 ice storm with prolonged lack of electricity.
Right.
We were done with North Carolina.
Well, and we'd have had to start over. We wouldn't have moved back to the same place in
Yeah.
North Carolina, so we'd have been starting over either way.
Yeah, so we chose Missouri because we really like the four seasons and the cost of living, and we could get the beauty of North Carolina, but we didn't have to deal with hurricanes. We only had to deal with tornadoes on occasion. So we figured that was better. And I loved being in the mountains again. Whereas if we'd gone back to North Carolina, we would have been more in the plains, and I absolutely love living in the Ozarks.
Yeah.
So we move here. Kids are struggling. I'm struggling. At this point, I have felt like I've been doing pretty much everything alone for at least 5 years, 2013, 7 years.
Yeah.
I've been pulling and handling the weight at home pretty much by myself at this point for 7 years. And Mason and I, we weren't really struggling out loud yet in our marriage, but I was beginning to feel a lot of distance. That was, I think, just the natural byproduct of how disengaged he was because of the church. With the Army, it was almost this, the sacrifice is worth it because it gets us to where you wanted to be with your career, and then you could support me in mine. But then once we threw the bishop wrench in, we were not, our family was not in a good place for Mason to be serving as the bishop, but that didn't matter. And you just don't say no to those callings. I mean, you can, but it was rough. So
Never even crossed my mind, really,
right.
to say no. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I'm beginning to recognize I don't think I can do this. I'm struggling with the gospel, and the realization that we are getting close to the end of Mason's military career, and I have nothing to show for it. If anything happens to Mason, the only thing I get is 50% of your retirement pay, which for our family turns to be about Mason, $1,500 to $1,800 a month. If you're not there, I get about $1,500 to $1,800 a month.
18 or 19.
$1,800 or $1,900 a month for the rest of my life. And that's it. That's all we have.
And insurance, but yes.
Yeah, and
as far
medical
as
insurance.
monetary
And
stuff.
if I get remarried, I lose it all. I lose the retirement, and I lose the medical benefits. Yep. And so I'm starting to feel really frustrated, and I'm beginning to feel really resentful towards the church. And this kind of falls into those feminist realizations, in the sense that I had done everything the church had told me to do, everything they had said that would make me happy. I was miserable. I love being a mom of young kids, but after so many years, I was done. And being a mom, I was really starting to feel just burned out. And we had 7 kids. Y'all, that's a lot of kids. And I love my kids. And I wouldn't want to give any of them back most days. Most days. I will keep them all. But I was really starting to struggle. But the other thing was, I haven't put anything into Social Security because I've been a stay-at-home mom. And I'm like, okay, it is, as Mason's getting wrapped up and we're settled, I need a job so that I can start to build somewhat of a retirement for myself. I need my own 401k. I need my own plan here. I need to start, paying into the system and whatnot, because otherwise there's going to come a point in time where my finances are going to go from very, very comfortable to flat broke.
Well, and you're just realizing that the security that exists in our lives doesn't transfer to you in the event of an emergency. Mm-mm. And I imagine, I've never been in that situation, but I imagine that's very scary.
Right. For me, it was, if Mason was to die today, how am I going to raise 7 children on less than $2,000 a month? I have nothing. I needed, right. And I did have my clinical experience. I could get a job as a counselor, but with all of the kids' special needs, I was realizing it's difficult to work for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because when somebody gets sick, even today, even though you're out of the military today, if one of our kids gets sick, if there's an emergency at the school, if anything happens, it's me. It's my career. It's I
Almost
have to
always,
leave.
yep.
It is almost always me.
Yep.
Because you cannot just walk out on patients when they're, on the OR table. And I'm sure, now with the civilian job that you have, that if there were those types of emergencies, there could be adjustments made. But for those, so-and-so, little Johnny has the flu today.
Right.
It's me that has to take that. And so as I'm going, okay, if I don't have Mason's income, what is there for me? Like, I can't get a regular job. And so I'm really starting to feel the pressure of I'm approaching 40 and I cannot survive without Mason's income. And I really did not like feeling like the only reason we were married was so that I could use you for your income potential. That made me feel really icky.
Yeah,
And
ouch.
Ouch. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. Big ouch. Well, and I had felt so much guilt when I opened my private practice in Texas. I felt a ton of guilt going back to work. By the time we got to Missouri, I had learned how much I loved having a job for myself and being able to contribute to things financially and put money in savings. And,
Sure.
I was really enjoying that freedom and whatnot. And we had found, good babysitters for the kids in Texas because we had been there for a while. So now
Right.
we're in Missouri. I know nobody. I don't have childcare for the kids. And I felt really trapped because you weren't coming. I'm in a brand new house, brand new city. I don't have any friends except for one who's like 45 minutes away, who has her own children and her own life. Like, she's got 6 kids and a husband who's incredibly busy. And, it's not, oh, you're just up the street, drop things. We can, just ping pong off of each other. It's a good
Right.
40-minute drive
Right, yeah.
between us. And I'm like, I don't have a community and I'm in trouble. And I was really feeling the need to escape. And I ended up getting a job as an MFLAC. I took a contract as an MFLAC and I was excited. And that contract could have turned into a permanent position for me, which I really wanted. I was making fairly decent money. They offered a really good retirement package and benefits so that I could, put into 401k. I mean, it was a good job for me, but I had to drive down to Fort Leonard Wood, and we purposefully bought our home an hour and a half away from Fort Leonard Wood because we did not want our kids to have to continue to deal with their friends moving away from them every few years. Like, we wanted that stability. We wanted a community that was not as transient as the military community is.
Yeah.
And so I was commuting to and from work, working 40 hours a week. And my sister and her husband moved into our house with the idea that they would move into our house and then we would eventually get them their own place. And I was paying her to provide childcare, which worked out really well because her husband at the time had, Mason, what is it called? I keep wanting to say Crohn's. It's not Crohn's. Cystic fibrosis. Her husband had cystic fibrosis and he is disabled. And so she's kind of in the same boat I am, where we're like, all right, we've really got to be able to be in positions where we can take care of our families on our own. And so her coming out and providing childcare so that I could work, and then for her payment, we were providing housing and a monthly income. And it was working out really well. But then I'm discovering that my brother-in-law is an asshole. And he is abusive, and he is spending all night on a computer looking at pornography, sleeping all day, and then feeling like he can just butt in and lecture my kiddos. Brother-in-law would, walk in on a situation, and then he would lecture my kids for like an hour, talking to them. And then he would come in and be like, oh, I've got a great relationship with them. And he was telling me how to parent. And I'm going to be honest, I was not in the best place emotionally. I was not as patient with my kids. I was the most stressed out as I've ever been. But having a man in my home who did not respect my role as mother, who did not respect my role as this is my house. So, kind of those my rules. My family is very much, we all participate together. We all do chores together. We cook together. We clean together. And so to have a man in my home undermining that, and then watching my kids kind of, oh, well, we don't have to do that because Uncle Asshole says that we don't have to, and, well, you shouldn't have to do this. And I was not happy with the way he was treating my sister either. Also, my health really began to go downhill. I had struggled with severe acid reflux for many years, and I started to lose my voice on a regular basis. And so I'd gone to the doctor, and my vocal cords were really inflamed and kind of being eaten away by the consistent acid that was in my chest. And so in order to avoid developing cancer in my esophagus, my larynx, and my sinus cavities from the severe GERD that I had, I ended up having surgery. It's called a fundoplication. It's where they basically make your stomach a one-way sphincter. So it's very difficult for me to throw up or burp. TMI, I know, but I've got this major medical thing where I'm having a hard time eating. This is making my commute even harder because I mean, just the 3-hour drive. I'm not home enough with my kids. I'm not appreciating the influence that brother-in-law has on my kids. Like, I have zero tolerance for men being hateful, rude, disrespectful to women or children. If Mason crosses that boundary, he's a lone survivor there, because it's just, I don't do it. So I was really struggling with that.
As it should be.
Right.
As it should be. Too many women.
Right.
Men too, of course, but especially women. Too many women put up with things that they should not have to. But part of the concern, what you're talking about, is, what do I do? People end up in relationships where they don't feel like they can get out.
You can say women put up with too much, but society has supported that.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm not saying it's their fault
I
either.
think that when women or men, either gender, in any relationship is putting up with abusiveness, there's underlying reasons going on there that we just can't judge. But I knew for me in my house, I will kick him out, because he's not going to be allowed to be around my children in this way anymore. Like, he's not taking any constructive criticism. He is purposefully putting my children at risk. Like, for example, we had severe ice storms the first winter we were here, and I told him, he had a rear wheel sports car, and I said, you are not to drive my children up and down this hill on these icy roads in that sports car. It's not safe. Your car is not equipped to get up and down our 1 mile, 1 lane. They call, it's basically a private road that doesn't get plowed, that's covered in several inches of ice. And so it's an uphill, downhill, twisty, turny road. Once you get off the main road to come up to our house, it's very treacherous when it freezes and it's iced over. You have to have 4-wheel drive in order to get in and out of our neighborhood during that type of weather. So he's driving his sports car, and he spun out. He completely ignored me, had my son in the car, and spun out and almost crashed his car into a tree with my kid in it. And that was my last straw. It was, you're not listening to me on like redirection of discipline and how to manage those things. But when you put my kids in danger, I'm not okay with that. I also was not at all excited about the fact that he was up all freaking night long on his computer watching pornography while the rest of us slept, so that he could then sleep all day long and not be an active participant in the home. He was definitely a freeloader. And if you're listening to this, Uncle Asshole, now you know how I really feel about you. Not that you had any questions, because you and I have come to blows and I don't keep my mouth shut. Gratefully, my sister has divorced him, is no longer with him, and he is no longer a member of our family, which has been amazing. Glad that he is no longer a member of my family in any way, because yuck. So anyway, now you know how I feel about Uncle Asshole. Okay, so
Moving right along.
Yeah, moving right along. So I had quit my job and I had reopened my private practice. I decided that private practice is really the only way that I can make sure that my ability to meet my children's needs and still make a livable income is through private practice. And so I have surgery. I kick brother-in-law out of the house. We put them in their own place. So my sister is still babysitting for me. They're just not living in my home anymore. And that was glorious because then brother-in-law never came. Once we told him that they couldn't live with us, he never came back to our house again, which was fine with me. But my sister did. My sister came and she was still providing childcare while I was opening my private practice. And then Mason moved back. Mason was finally able to join us. And 2 weeks later, COVID breaks out.
Yeah.
Sister's husband, who has cystic fibrosis, gets really, really sick. And with COVID going on, he's now spent several weeks in the hospital. And they end up deciding that it would be best for them to go back to Arizona because they do not have medical insurance in Missouri, and he can't get on state insurance because he's not going to the doctor. The brother-in-law would avoid the doctor until things got really, really bad, and then he'd go through the emergency room, be admitted for several weeks, and then never follow up on his follow-up appointments. And so in the state of Missouri, he could not get on state disability or state insurance because they didn't have enough data to demonstrate that he needed it since he was not taking part of his preventative care measures. And so they ended up moving back to Arizona. At this point, I'm really overwhelmed because now I've lost a child care provider that I trust implicitly. And Mason is now making that commute to and from Leonard Wood, and I'm opening my private practice. The other piece of this that really throws a wrench in is that my service animal, Daisy, passes away. Daisy had been with us for 12 years. She was not, when we adopted her, she was not meant to be a service animal, but while I was in San Antonio, Mason, you look like you're going to say something. Oh, you're just listening? Mm-hmm. Okay. Breathing with anticipation. Mason is experiencing anticipatory breathing breaths. Okay. So, oh, nice. That's cute, hun. Okay. So anyway, we'd had Daisy for 12 years. When I was in San Antonio, I had the opportunity to work with animals within a clinic. And so I took Daisy and I got her trained, and she had been my partner. So during all this time, while Mason's not available, I've got Daisy, and Daisy was very good at calming people down. And so when one of the kids would have a tantrum, I couldn't handle it anymore, I literally would say, why don't you go snuggle with Daisy and then we'll talk in a minute. And that was so helpful for me because when I hit my breaking point, the kids could go snuggle with the dog. I could get a 10-minute breather and re-engage. And Daisy ended up getting, we're assuming it was a brain tumor because she went from the most peaceful, mellow dog ever. She bit to biting the UPS man. She'd always hunted squirrels and wildlife, but I walked outside one day and had, I don't know, close to somewhere probably between 30 and 50 dead squirrels in the yard in one day. And then she had killed Katie's cat. And by the time she was biting other people and growling at my kids, it was so weird. I took her to the vet and we had to put her down. And that broke me, because I was alone. I didn't know how to do it anymore, and I was at my worst ever mama place. I was not showing up for my kids. I was not honoring my own boundaries for how to parent and how to discipline my kids, and it was really getting difficult. And this was actually before you joined us, Mason. So Daisy passed away before Mason joined us, a few months before.
Yeah, a little bit before that.
Mason came home. And in a deep grief haze, I was working in my clinic and I was doodling on a piece of paper and I drew this little infinity sign with a heart and a daisy flower in it. And I was contemplating all of the loss that I had experienced because of the church and then Daisy's death. And I decided in that instant that I was going to get that image tattooed on my wrist. And so I canceled my appointments and I got up out of my chair and I drove to the closest open tattoo parlor in town. And I said, I want this on my wrist. And I wasn't really thinking clearly at all. Tattoos had never really bothered me. I'd actually always wanted a tattoo of a butterfly on my ankle. You know, the classic lady, you know, tasteful little butterfly on the ankle. I'm so unique. And so anyway, I walk into the tattoo parlor. I'm not thinking clearly. I say I want the tattoo. He says, okay, he's had a cancellation in the morning. No big deal at all. It's not a difficult piece. And I paid him the money and signed the papers. And about, I'm going to say 10 minutes into the actual tattooing, I finally snap out of this haze. And I can't really explain it. I was in this so numb. I couldn't feel anything I wanted to feel, and I didn't care. And I wanted something that would keep the loss that I had experienced close and a permanent reminder. And a tattoo was the obvious thing. And then about 10 minutes into it, I went, oh shit, what am I doing? I haven't talked to Mason about this. I didn't think this through. This was a last minute decision, but it's too late. At this point, I've got a solid black line on my wrist that's, you know, going to be the shape of a heart and an infinity sign. So I got home. After the tattoo, I show my kids. My kids were actually excited. Like my son Eric was like, wow, Mom, that's really cool. I like that. That's a meaningful tattoo. And so I was grateful for that. My kids were really supportive and whatnot. Charlie was really supportive. My sister. So anyway, so my little sister, who I have named Charlie in my book, was also very supportive of my tattoo. But I got to tell Mason.
Oh, yeah. How did Mason handle that?
Well, Mason, I wrote right here on here, Mason freaks out and says awful things. That's what's on my outline. Mason, how did you handle it?
That's a fair description. That's a fair description. Yeah. I don't really remember. I was pissed off for sure. Mm-hmm. I was worried because, of course, this was out of character. You're telling this story, this going on over the last, 2, 3, 4 years. I didn't know any of this.
Right. You were oblivious to my struggles because I hadn't shared them with you.
Right. I didn't know. And part of that is because of the emotional distance that we had shared. And mostly my fault. We're not here to talk about that, but mostly my fault that there'd been emotional distance. And I didn't know about this, whether because I wasn't safe or just because we were emotionally distant. I wasn't there at that time. There are a lot of factors, but I didn't know. And so when you called and told me that you'd gotten a tattoo, it kind of felt a little out of the blue. I knew you'd been hurting because, of course, Daisy had just passed and you were alone.
Right.
That's nobody handles that super well. And at this point, you've been alone for several months. I don't remember exactly when that was, but you'd been alone for several months. And then you kind of described the haze and where you had been. And that just scared me because I didn't know what that meant.
Right. I recognize it now as dissociation. It was a trauma response. I dissociated in trauma. And it took the pain of a tattoo, which, y'all, it hurts. Woo! Hurts like, hey, yo.
Right. So I was also just scared, and I didn't really know how to respond. And I was still in that black and white life. The idea that a spouse would go out and get a tattoo, which is a permanent thing, without even talking to their spouse was foreign to me. And so, there was a lot going on. I didn't handle it very well.
And then I got a second one.
Yeah.
So then Mason and I are talking. I'm like, look, I already have a tattoo. I've always wanted the butterfly on my ankle. And so I talked to him about it, and he's like, I guess I'm okay with that. Go ahead and get the tattoo of a butterfly on your ankle. And I think, Mason, in your head, you were envisioning like something that was discreet and small, like the size of a quarter, a simple little butterfly.
You mean like a little butterfly? Yeah. Because, that's how you described it. Yes, that's what I was expecting. A little butterfly.
It's only about 12 inches.
Not a hand's worth. Yeah.
And about
Like
4 inches wide.
Big hand's worth.
It's gorgeous. Do you know how many compliments I get on my butterfly tat? So yes, I have a butterfly tat on my calf and ankle. And it is not your typical girly little butterfly on the ankle. Sarah's going to do something. It's go big or go home, y'all. Yeah.
Well,
so then I send Mason the picture of the butterfly tat. And oh man, we had a lot of things that we had to work through. And that's probably something for another day because yeah, Mason, you freaked out. You said some really hurtful and awful things and it lasted for a while. So this is probably the first argument that you and I have had where you were cruel. Like I'd never experienced Mason being cruel to me before ever. I don't think ever. I don't think you've ever. Yeah. I don't think I can say anything that you had done before then was with malice or cruelty. And we'd been married at that point 20 years.
Yeah.
21 years.
If there were, little blips here or there. But yeah,
right, that you would,
kind
of where you might snap at me and then be like, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean that. Like the first time you called me young lady shortly after we got married and you were like, come back here, young lady. And I flipped on you and you were like, whoa, I'm sorry. That is not what I meant to say. And I still let you have it. You will not call me that. You're not my father. Woo. Yeah. All right. Arguments in the Westbrook home. There have not been that many arguments between us. And so.
And I'm not cruel. So obviously this was a change for both of us.
Yeah.
It was a manifestation of the fact that we were not in a good place.
Yeah. And then you came back, so jump back into, so then you're in Missouri and it's like, Mason's got this. I've got to save my wife. She's not in a good place thing going on, but we are so emotionally distant from each other. But my sister got to observe you treating me with respect. Like you'd finally gotten past the cruelty of the tattoos.
That only happened really that one conversation, if I
remember
it was, correctly. No, it was a
couple. It was a couple of conversations. I'm going to say you were kind of a jerk for about 2 weeks, and then you pulled it together, and then you were kind. And then you got there, you got to us, and my sister got to observe what it looks like when a man hears his wife, doesn't discredit his wife, treats her well. Because I grew up in a home where, for my dad, you can't have an opinion other than his without argument. And so this is my sister's opportunity to see that. And so I felt very grateful for that. But I was really struggling because, on the surface, once again, we're really good friends. We work really well together. But there's nothing anymore. Like the emotional piece of me is dead at this point. And not because I didn't want it to be there. I was burned out.
Yeah.
And even though I had studied burnout, I had no idea the depth of burnout. And I would go to church. So I went to church after my tattoo. I got released. I was serving in Missouri. I'd been called to be in the young women's. And then I overheard some young women talking about what the bishop had said about me getting a tattoo at the dinner table the other night in young women's. And then I got released from young women's because I got a tattoo on my wrist. And I was livid. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, if we'd been in a military ward, nobody's going to release me for getting a tattoo. Like, because
no, definitely not.
Because one of the things I love about a military ward is that they don't fit that bubble Mormon environment. You've got lots of ethnicities. You've got people from all different walks of life and different cultures. And frankly, if you're serving in the military during wartime, which we have, the things that we care about, the things that get our feathers ruffled are not the same things that get people's feathers ruffled in regular wards. I remember moving in and people were like, oh, this is such a rough ward. And I got there and I'm like, they aren't calling 5 new primary workers every other Sunday. This is not a rough ward, y'all. So I'm sure it's rough in its own ways, but I got released from my calling, and then I didn't get a calling for a while. And then they called me to teach Sunday school, and then COVID broke out. So I think I ended up teaching the 12-year-old Sunday school class. And we got a new bishop too. We got a new bishop before I got a new calling. So the old bishop got released and the new bishop got called. And the new bishop, I don't think gives a crap about my tattoos at all. But the old bishop was definitely Molly Mormon. Like, it was bad news that Sarah had gotten 2 tats. 1 tat gets released. 2nd tat, whoa, something's going on.
Maybe he was just a prophet and he knew which road you were walking down.
You know, that's interesting because at that point, I was still very much in the mindset of I can do good from within, but I wasn't finding my feet in that ward.
Yeah.
Like, all of
You
the
never really did
friendships, all of the friendships felt very superficial. Like one of the sisters in the ward, it was Veterans Day, and I'm out shopping with some sisters from the ward that I'm trying to become friends with. And they're like, Mason's in the Army. Is he a veteran? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, wait, Mason's gone to war? And I was all, yeah? Like real war? And I'm just going, wait, what are you talking about? Like, what? Yes, real war. Twice. He's gone twice, actually. Twice to real war. And she's like, but he seems so normal. I was just like, oh, honey buns. Yeah, but the conversations were superficial and surface, and I missed.
And you don't do surface very well.
I don't do surface very well, and I missed that deep. I have your back no matter what. You can get a tattoo. You can panic and have a crazy moment. Like my friend that was 45 minutes away, I got the tattoo. No change in our friendship, but we're Army sisters, and that's a deep, like, we've been through shit together. These are people where we can't talk about real life challenges.
Yeah.
It's about Dollar Tree shopping and who's going to donate what pencils to the school thing. And I know that's great for some people, but for me, it just does not work, especially in my field. I deal with depth every day at work.
Yeah.
I cannot walk out of that and have superficial friendships. I don't know how to function in those types of friendships. So I was not finding my feet. So when COVID breaks out, I'm relieved because it takes church off my plate. And I remember, Mason, do you remember when Nelson announced that church was only going to be 2 hours?
Yeah.
And I told you it was an answer to my prayers that I had been praying for months, that I didn't think I could do 3-hour church anymore, and that I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to go anymore because it was just too hard to do 3-hour church while you're the bishop and I've got all these kids. And I told you it was a huge answer to my prayers, and I felt that Nelson had gotten that from God for me.
The irony was we had just pulled into the mental health hospital where Brig was staying. Yeah. This was back in
that's right.
Back in Colleen. We were listening to conference on the way to go visit Brig or pick him up. I don't remember.
At San Marcos Treatment Center.
And we're like, wow, yeah.
Yeah, and for me it was like, one less hour of having to wrangle special needs kids at church. Yeah. I do remember that, Mason.
Yep.
You're right.
Yeah.
So then COVID breaks out and now it's no church. And I had no idea how much I needed those Sundays. Like I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I think it was in January of the year after COVID. So that would have been January of 2021. Yes, because I kicked off all the hospital stays. Mine was the first one. So I am driving to work probably November-ish time frame, and I feel like, no, this was while you were still in Texas, where I feel really suicidal, like I'm going to crash my car into something. And I canceled all of my appointments, and I drove to my friend in Jeff City, and I said, I have to sit on your couch till I can see a psychiatrist. And I've got an appointment for 4 o'clock this afternoon, but I can't be unsupervised. And she dropped everything and we sat in her little TV room in their basement, and she talked to me, and we just like reconnected, and it was so soothing. And then I saw the doctor telehealth at her house, and I can't remember if you were in Missouri or not. The first
don't
time
remember
I
either.
went to Jeff City to my friend and saw the doctor, and they adjusted my antidepressant, because at this point I'd gone on an antidepressant. And then a couple months later, it happens again, but this time I'm not going to go to Jeff. I'm not safe to drive to Jeff. I remember pulling the 4Runner over on the side of the road, rolling down the passenger window, and I chucked my keys. So it was the remote start, and I chucked them into the grass off the side of the highway. It was freezing. And I sat in the car wishing that I could die and being furious with myself for getting rid of the keys, because now the car won't start, which I'd done on purpose. And I close my eyes and I see my children's faces, and I choose in that moment, I have to live, because I know what happens. I see people who have survived a parent's or siblings' suicide, parents, siblings, grandparents,
A close family member,
friend, suicide. And the only reason I'm going to live is because I won't do that to my kids. And I called you. I got myself calmed down enough that I then had to get out of the car in the freezing cold, find my key where I had tossed it out of the car, started the car, called Mason. I drove to my office, which was only like a mile away, curled up here in my office until you got here. And then you took me to the emergency room. And I spent about 10 days inpatient psych because I wanted to die and I couldn't stay away. There was no way. If I hadn't come to the office and waited for you, if I hadn't had you there, I wouldn't be here today. Y'all, I was that close to being dead. As I sat in the psych unit, one of the problems with the psych unit is there's nothing to do.
Too much time on my hands.
Yeah, no joke. And because of COVID and short staffedness and whatnot, the hospital was great. They did a really good job, but they didn't have the therapy services. And I'm telling you, as a therapist, as I sit in here and I'm listening to these mental health techs run group, in my head, I'm like, that's not the right thing that you're supposed to say in this moment. You're underqualified. You just totally shamed that person. So I had to kind of excuse myself from it because I wasn't helping myself get better. I was being pretty hateful to the poor guy trying to run that group. It was awful. He was a nice person. He had really good intentions, but they really needed licensed professionals to be running some of those things. And I don't know why they didn't. It was right after COVID. So, we had to be in masks and get COVID tested and blah, blah, blah. And as I sat in there with nothing to do, they gave me a Bible. I got the Gideon Bible, and I couldn't even read it. Like, I couldn't read anything. I couldn't focus. I couldn't read more than 5 words. I'd lose my place on the page. They diagnosed me with a nervous breakdown. So, they diagnosed me with still the depression, anxiety, and stuff. But as I talked to the doctor and the counselor that was assigned to me, they were talking about compassion fatigue and burnout and a nervous breakdown. And one of the things that they were telling me was, you've got 2 years before your brain can function again. You have to slow down. You have to take it easy. I'm balling in there because I've got special needs kids. We're back in a white community. Abby's struggling with some racist things. I'm like, I can't even, how do I fix this? And I felt so bad because that's what I'm dealing with. And I've got this black counselor there talking to me going, yeah, it really sucks. And I get it. And I mean, she and I connected, but that, I don't know. It was rough. She was a good therapist, but I only saw her like once every 4 days, and it just wasn't enough for me. And so everybody was like, you have to slow down. You have to take it easy. And as I sat in my bed in that room, I had a really good roommate too. I got really blessed with my first roommate, not so good. And we did a room request change. And the roommate I used to have, she got her own room because she was really struggling with some psychosis, and I couldn't sleep because she wasn't safe. So they got her moved over, and then the roommate that moved in, she and I got along really well, and she and I are still friends outside of the hospital. And as I sat there contemplating what in my life am I able to give up, there wasn't anything. It was close my practice. I can't. I've got a lease. I have to work. Like, I can't go back to being stay-at-home mom full time. I won't live. How do I live? How do I get back to life, and how do I live? And the only thing that I could give up was the church. There was nothing else I could take off of my plate. And at that point, I knew it wasn't true, but I didn't have any evidence for it being not true other than it just didn't feel true. And I was struggling with that because, you're supposed to pray and trust your feelings, and I'm praying and my answers are leave the Mormon church, and I'm feeling really good about that. And I'm like, okay, this is confirmation bias. And then I'd be like, no, the church is true, you got to stay there. And I'm like, no, that's confirmation bias. And I know too much about the brain to be kind to myself.
Sounds kind of exhausting.
It was exhausting. So I get out of the hospital about 10 days later, and I know I'm going to quit church. I'm not going to go anymore. And my plan is to just go inactive and be silent and just kind of disappear into the background. That didn't happen. Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma. Here we are. But
well, I think in this journey, you were looking for that authentic who am I?
Yeah.
And that's not really authentic to who you are. You're
Yeah,
not a silent person.
But there's so many good things about the people in the church, and there's so many good things that an organization like that has, that I was still really trying to be.
It still does a lot of good for people.
Yeah, and I didn't want to lose my friends, and I knew that was a possibility and whatnot, but I couldn't. So I get back from the hospital. I took an extra week off of work before coming back to work, and in my first week back at work, I take a new client, and this new client and her husband are fighting. Because she doesn't want to be a member of the church anymore, and he is, and he's a black and white thinker. Pretty certain that gentleman was on the autism spectrum, because it was like talking to Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, and a lot of times. And this client tells me, Sarah, have you ever read the CES letter? Because once I read that, like, I was done, and he's just ignoring all the evidence that the church isn't true. And this is the first I've heard of it. So up to this point, I barely heard about, no, I hadn't even heard that yet. I have never heard about Mormon stories. I have no idea who John DeLynn is. I mean, during the September 6th, which was a long time ago, but during like John DeLynn's excommunication and Kate Kelly's excommunication, I'm not paying attention to any of that because I am net deep in Brig and psychosis and special needs kids. Like, I don't even care. I'm too busy to care about any of that. So I've never heard of Mormon stories, no idea who John DeLynn is, never heard of the CES letter, no idea what all this, like, I've never looked at quote unquote, anti-Mormon anything. And anti-Mormon just means something not published by the church that says something the church doesn't like. That's what anti means, okay? So anyway,
according to Mormonism,
that's what anti is. And I've never looked at any of it. And so I get through the session, and I'm trying to teach this couple how to communicate. I've been successful at helping people through mixed faith marriages before using the Gottman curriculum. Like that doesn't bother me that there's mixed faith marriages or anything. That I'm not going to talk to them, but I'm like, I wonder what this CES letter is. So I looked it up. They happened to be the last client of my day. And the kids were at school, so I didn't have to be home right away. And I look up the CES letter, and y'all, I read that. I'm a fast reader. I read the whole thing in a couple of hours. And I was like, this is the evidence. It was like my permission slip. It wasn't, I didn't leave because of the historical issues, but the CES letter was like, hey, this is the permission slip. This confirms that these quote unquote bad fruits, because for me it was by their fruits ye shall know them. And I'm looking at the church going, there's a lot of shitty, rotten, nasty, gross fruit. And I can't get past it because we're not pruning off the branches to get rid of the nasty fruit. I'm feeling like this is a really corrupt, gross tree. We need to prune it really good. And once I got the CS letter, I was like, well, that's why the fruit's nasty. The church isn't true. And I was able to go, bye-bye.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I think that I imagine some people have got this, but just the idea that, Mormonism tends to teach that you hear all this stuff and then somehow that pulls you away from the church. And in this case, and maybe that happens for some people, it probably happens for a lot of people.
Happens for a lot of people, yeah.
But in this case, you were looking around and essentially were seeing the way that people were getting treated. We talked about polygamy. And the way that women were treated. We talked about racism and the way that other races are treated. We talked about the LGBTQ.
IA.
IA.
Yeah.
And how they're treated. And we talked about tithing. Tithing wasn't a big issue because of the money, but because of what the money was not doing.
Right. Well, and because they had lied to me.
Right.
But
there was some personal betrayal there too.
I didn't know yet about the tithing issues.
But you didn't know that yet. Right.
When I left the church, I didn't yet know about the tithing issues. It was not for a couple of months.
So the big things that had already led you to the point where I'm not doing this anymore are the way that people are getting treated. And then, and we've talked about this several times, of course, because this hit us differently. For you were ready to leave the church. You felt like that's what you needed to do. And then this was kind of the excuse. It was the evidence to show that this is this is okay.
It was something I could hold in my hands. Like I printed off the PDF at work, which was no big deal because I've got, commercial printer and ran it off real quick. It's long.
Right.
It's a long ass document. It's a very good document. And it was something I could hold in my hand.
Right.
And I began at that point to chase down most of the sources. I did not chase down every single source, but man, I chased those sources down to make sure that it was true. And I followed those sources. And then I sat down with you.
Because
over a weekend, I chased most of those sources. Like my eyes were burning out of my face.
Because this was a relief for you.
Yes.
It was a relief for you. And of course, it wasn't for me.
Mason had no idea yet.
It wasn't for me. I didn't know any of this stuff. Right. Yeah. And so that all came up later, of course, but for you, it was a relief. And I love the fact that in all of this was a hard time for us, a hard time for you. I love that in what drove you away was one of the things that so many people feel is a strength of the Mormon Church in the way that we treat people. And in a lot of ways, it is a strength. We in general treat people pretty well.
No. That was a Freudian slip. In general, we treat pretty people pretty well.
No, it wasn't.
Also true. Oh, don't even go. Well, that's a podcast for another day. Keep going.
But anyway, we in general as a church treat people pretty well. But you're picking out some of these huge areas where that's not really the case.
Well, and the challenge is I'm also picking out narcissistic leadership tendencies, toxic systems, cult-like mentality, and how cults. I mean, this is my work. My work is in psychology and behavioral health. And I mean, I was seeing LDS clients and they weren't getting better. Like they would get better to a point and they'd stall out. And I remember calling a colleague of mine and saying, hey, I've got this phenomenon. Is this me? Like, is this my bias getting in the way? What's going on here? And the colleague who was not Mormon said, no, I get to the same place with Mormon clients and most of them stall out. They cannot get past it. Their religious culture, their belief does not let them challenge certain things. Like there's a cognitive block there. It's not just you. And this was really hard for me because I didn't practice in Texas long enough to see the stall out in the way I was seeing it here in Missouri. Also in Texas, I opened my practice, 90% of my practice, 80%, 90% was LDS.
So not really a good comparison.
Right. And before that, I had worked with adjudicated kiddos. And so there were limits to me being able to measure how effective I was.
Sure.
But in private practice, I'm measuring and monitoring my success rates. And my LDS clients are stopping. They're stalling out. And my non-LDS clients are healing. And my 6-month and my 12-month and my 18-month follow-ups, they're maintaining the gains that they got in therapy and doing well. And my LDS clients are like forever clients because we're not getting things under control because when I ended up sourcing it with, let me think, 4 different professionals that I worked with. No, 5. Because I talked to the LDS social services guy and I was like, hey, are you seeing this amongst the LDS population? And he said the same thing. He said, yeah, I see it. And he says, but it's hard to fight because it's built into our culture. So I had 5 other professionals that I was seeking professional consultation to make sure that it wasn't me, the provider. And it wasn't. And as I continue to practice now, my non-LDS clients make gains in therapy faster and maintain those with higher efficacy than my LDS clients do, unless my LDS clients are nuanced. So my progressive thinker LDS clients, they do fine. My nuanced LDS clients, the ones who are like, yeah, well, some of that's not, right. They seem to be able to push past it. But my deep ingrained 100%, what we would call the TBM, True Blue Mormons.
The all-in people.
The all-in people, the Masons. Sorry, but that's where you were at the time. They hit a brick wall in therapy and they can't push past it. That's what I've seen. And I don't know how to get them to push past it and still be ethical and not hurt their testimony. And I do that. Like I have to say, hey, I think, as long as you continue to believe this, you're going to struggle. And most of the time they're okay with it. Most of the time they're like, this is just the adversary. This is the evidence that I'm on the right path, because there's this like mindset in the Mormon church that if there's friction, if there's resistance, it means Satan's working against me because I'm doing God's will, not my life sucks. And if I would let that go, I would not have anxiety anymore.
Right.
Like we glorify in the Mormon church, what I was seeing and what really shook me to my core is that we were glorifying mental health illness as a sign and symptom of righteousness. And I was like, no, that it doesn't, It was really hard for me.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in the car with you. We've pulled in at home and I tell you, Mason, I have something to tell you. And I had the CES letter that I'd printed out at the office. And I said, I don't believe the Mormon church is true. I'm not going to go anymore. And I want you to read this. It was a CES letter. And you didn't handle that very well. It did not go over well. So we really struggled. And we're going to talk about a lot of that struggle in future podcasts because we want our listeners to hear that story. But this is really where the story becomes ours again, rather than mine.
Yeah, this isn't just your story anymore. Yeah.
And so really, I was lost for a while. And then I saw my friend Mark Osland post something on Facebook about doing his interview with John DeLynn and that the church was coming after him for it. And so that's when I first learned about Mormon stories. The very first Mormon stories episode I ever listened to was Mark's. And so we knew Mark. We were in North Carolina when Mark Osland served his mission in North Carolina. And so we got to see just how he talks about his religious scrupulosity or OCD. And I mean, we were there with him when he went out into our backyard. We were doing a barbecue or something. He was at our house for dinner while he was on his mission. And we were throwing a baseball around with Eric. And baseball is Mark's thing. Like, he almost got into the major leagues with baseball. And he's gently throwing it with the kids. And you can just see this love and this joy in his eyes. And then, you and he threw a couple of balls a little bit harder. And then he was like, Brother Westbrook, I got to stop. While I'm on my mission, I have to focus on my mission. And he refused to play. He stopped. And then he told us the story of how he wasn't going to because he'd made this choice. And I remember being sad for him and saying, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you throw a ball with children and in fun. Like, you can do that and still keep the spirit. But I didn't tell him that. I just remember thinking that and feeling that. And so I have a lot of respect for Mark. He's still my favorite. He's my favorite baseball player. We actually went to we went to a BYU baseball game.
Yeah.
And he was pitching.
Yep.
And we had no idea, and he had no idea, because we went with your sister.
Well, we wondered if he would be there, but
we wondered,
didn't
but
go
we didn't
because he
know.
was there. Yeah.
And then he was there, and we were screaming for Elder Osland and Elder O. We were yelling for him, and he signed a baseball, and his signed baseball sits right next to the baseball signed by Dale Murphy, who was Mason's mission president. And I'm telling you, Mark, your baseball's still my favorite. I like yours over Dale Murphy. Sorry, ex-President Murphy, but it's true. Hey, I couldn't look Brother Murphy in the eyes because he's so stinking tall. I came up to like his belly button. Mark's tall, but he's not quite as tall as Dale Murphy. So anyway, that was when I found Mormon Stories and a community. And that was when I recognized I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who sees these issues. And the more I listened to Mormon Stories, the more I knew that I needed to speak my truth, because Mason, like you said, this is who I am at my core. I've never been silent ever in my life about anything, ever. Why would I start now? And so I stayed silent for about 6, 7, 8 months, giving you an opportunity.
Mostly silent, yes.
Yeah, mostly silent.
Yeah.
And then your family, people were starting to ask me questions because I had taken off my garments and whatnot. And I pretty much came to you and said, we have to tell your family and my family. Otherwise, they're going to find out.
You wanted to choose when and how rather than
them just discover it.
Up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that was a shit show too. But my family was fine. Your family, not so much. We talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but I think the thing that I really want to close with today, the thing that really stands out to me about this was the day that Mason made a shift in his ability to see how much the church was hurting me was the day that we were driving home from something. And I said, Mason, do you not realize that when I chose to leave the church, in my mind, you were going to divorce me? And I was going to lose you, my friends, and my church community, everything in my life. I knew I was going to lose it, and I chose that anyway so that I could stay alive for my children, because my option was stay in the church and be dead, or be alive for my children and not have you in my life in the same way. Because when I told you, I was certain, especially after the struggles we had in the beginning, I was certain it wasn't going to work out. I didn't think you were going to stay married to me. And when I told you that I had chosen to live alone for the kids because that was better than dying and staying in the church, I think that was when it finally clicked in your head just how much the church had been suffocating me for so many years.
Well, there was a lot more to that conversation too.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Again, something for another day.
Yeah. So it was a tough journey, and I think we probably need to do a follow-up and delve into that story. But mostly we like taking certain and specific issues and being able to kind of get deeper into them and approach them from a mental health standpoint, from a how are we observing this incorrectly kind of a thing. So tough time for us. What I really appreciate, and I think I've kind of said already, but I just want to reiterate, you speak up. The reason you chose not to be silent is because, once again, you were speaking up for the marginalized. Some of that was for you, but mostly it was, I'm seeing these things that are going on that are marginalizing other people. Whether you're right or wrong, you can see that people are being marginalized, and that's not okay. Right. And I think that's the biggest thing from the speaking up standpoint. Like there's other things that are more important to me about your journey, but when it comes to the speaking up part and why we're doing this, it is really about marginalization. It's about people being stuck in a thought process that isn't helping them.
People being silenced.
Yeah. It's about not having your own voice. That's a big deal for you, and rightly so. So yeah, I'm grateful that you have had that opportunity and that I get to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. It reminds me of that meme that we've shared back and forth several times, something along the lines of, I tell my story so those that can't know they're not suffering alone.
You know what? That's what was I going to say?
I have something to do.
So when you brought up Mormon stories and you were first exposed to it and you realized that you weren't alone in this process, I think that, and this is just my perspective, so take it for what it's worth, but it feels like the church, high demand religions, want you to be ostracized if you leave. They want you to feel alone.
Yes, that is one of the things that the Mormon church does that from the psychological perspective qualifies it as being a cult.
Right.
Is that people cannot leave the Mormon church with grace. And not only that, but then the Mormon church turns it around and says, you left and you're persecuting me. And I'm going, I just said I don't believe. So for me, I believe that Joseph Smith was a very brilliant con artist. That's who I think he is.
Right. So.
And I'm sharing the evidence that I have for that. But I'm not doing that to harm the church, hurt the church. I'm sharing my opinion. Now, I could get on when I was a member. I did get on and I was like, this conference talk was amazing. Look at all of this. This is what I believe. Come join us here, like this missionary work. I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm not purposely trying to harm anybody. Nobody sharing general conference talks is trying to hurt or offend people, but you are. Right. On occasion, you absolutely are. And so for me to now be able to say, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it, and the church saying, you're persecuting us, stop talking about it, be quiet. One of the things that was really interesting was I posted something on Facebook the one time, and your sister got really upset, and she was like, well, this is what I think, this is what I think. And I was like, I can't say anything back. Like, the way that you're shunning and ostracizing and silencing me is, I'm allowed to preach to you because what I have to say is true, but you have to sit in a chair with your hands tied behind your back and a gag in your mouth because I won't hear your story back because it's damaging and persecuting to me. And I don't do that. That's not my wheelhouse. What I love about Mormon stories is that those of us who are leaving had a place to go to know we weren't the only ones. And Mormon Stories has done a great job of building an ex-Mormon community for other people like me. Like if you're in the Utah or the Arizona area, they have set up some awesome things. Maybe Idaho, I don't know. But they've set up some awesome things so that people can find community outside the Mormon church. Because I'm telling you, I lost my community. It was gone.
Yeah.
And then, wait, let me finish. And then on the other side with Bill Reel and Mormon Discussions, I feel like they are the ones bringing in the information backed by the historical research and the scientific research. So you've got Mormon Stories that's doing the experiential and the sharing the stories, and you're not alone. And you've got Bill Reel and RFM and Mormon Discussions who's doing this is the information, this is where you find your source material, and so on. Those two podcasts changed my life because I knew I wasn't alone and I had access to other people's research that confirmed that when I had all that doubt of, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Oh, maybe this is the elect leaving. Maybe this is, I had the research and the source. It was called, for me, it was a reality check. I was able to check in with reality and say, I'm good. This evidence still supports that this is not what I want to be a part of anymore. And I'm not alone, and look at all these people on Mormon Stories that share the same feelings. You know, it's Mormon Stories, Mason, that brought us the first skills of how to navigate a mixed faith marriage.
Yeah.
Because we were no longer alone. We got to listen to other people's experiences.
So, thank you. The church, it feels like the church ostracizes, and the reason that I see that high demand religions ostracize people that leave is because they want you to feel that the only place that you can go back is to them. And that's a dangerous thing, whether or not that's a good organization. It's a very dangerous thing. It's a toxic thing to do, because I can think of, so if we go with this idea of good and bad, I can think of only one side that wants you to feel alone. And if that's what this organization is doing, that's not okay. It's not healthy. It's not the way that the Savior works or a loving God works. And ultimately, why this community is so important is that they allow people to still be human. They allow people to recognize, I can get through this. I can do this. I'm not just alone. You know, one of the reasons that the suicide rate for the LGBTQ community in Mormondom is so high is because they are ostracized. They feel completely alone. And if we as a community...
And there's no place for them to turn within the religious organization...
Right.
That will love them without judgment.
Right. And these are mostly, we're talking about teenagers now, right? You can't just walk away from your family as a teenager. Most people are not going to be successful doing that. So they either have to live completely inauthentically, or they have to ostracize the people that love them or supposedly love them the most. But the reason why this community is so important is because it allows us to go through this and not feel alone. Now, if you can get healthy and recognize some of the toxic patterns in your life, and then you decide you want to go back to that organization, fine. Go back as a healthy individual.
Healthy and informed.
Healthy and informed, yeah.
Informed is really important, because a lot of times the things that I will bring up that bother me, like I remember talking to your mom, she's like, no, that's not it. And I'm like, no, even the Mormon church has now said that's the case. And they don't, your mom believes in something that she doesn't know because the church has lied. She doesn't know, and she doesn't even know the church's historical spin that makes it, quote unquote, okay. She doesn't know it exists because it was hidden and covered up for so long. If you know those things and you still believe and you want to go and it makes you happy, go. Embrace it. Do good. Find your peace. Wonderful.
Here at Unpacking Mormonism, we're seeking for informed and healthy. That's really what we want. We don't care where you end up as long as you are informed and healthy and happy. And that's the choice that you've made with all the information available to you. And I am grateful to be a part of that. I'm grateful to have heard so much from that community that helps to, if it did nothing else, but just let people know they're not alone in this process.
Right.
That would be enough. It does a lot more than that. But if it only did that, if it only helped people like yourself not be alone. And I remember you talking about how you had found this community and your search for this community, because obviously listening to a podcast isn't a community, quote unquote. You needed a closer community, but that opened the door. That helped you get to where you needed to be. And that's what we want. We don't want you to feel alone as you go through this process.
Yeah. So in closing, I want to tell my audience that leaving the Mormon church is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I would say the next closest thing was losing our twins. For sure. But it has been worth it. I am so much happier. So much happier. I love being me. I'm fun again. Like when I was young and in high school, I was happy-go-lucky and free and fun until the trauma occurred when I was 16. And then there was always this fear, this reservation. And since leaving the Mormon church, I have shaken that. It is gone. Just like my clients, I had hit a brick, a wall in being able to grow and become and heal from everything. Then, because I've left the Mormon church, I was able to finally say to my parents who had been harming my children, no more. I'm happier. I'm more at peace. And our marriage is better. We have a lot of hard conversations because Mason still considers himself a member. And so we have some hard conversations. Just last Sunday, we had a nice little blow up argument because our stove was not working correctly and a miscommunication led Mason to feel like I was trying to stop him from going to church, and he misunderstood what my intention in my statement was because that wasn't the case. And it was not a very pretty argument, and we had to apologize and come back together. But I would say overall, we are closer than ever.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Well, that's good. You better not. So thanks so much for joining us on this special. I'm thinking, Mason, that maybe we need to do like maybe a New Year's special or something where we can talk about our journey together after the disclosure. And some of those things are, I know in one of the earlier ones you had said that it was in the racism episode that you had said, I didn't know your story on that. And so I think that we'll definitely be doing another special in the near future, maybe around the holidays, maybe in the spring, who knows? We'll let you know when we decide. We'll let you know when we know, okay? That's just how I roll.
Just keep listening. It'll show up.
It'll show up eventually. And we can absolutely
when Mason's
cover those
comfortable
things.
being that vulnerable with himself, yeah.
Yeah, well... and as always, please, if you have any questions or if there's any topics or issues that you want us to cover, we would love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. And now you know why my company is Daisy Girl. Because
now you know.
Daisy.
Finally.
Yeah. I love my Daisy Girl. She was my best four-legged friend. She helped me raise my kids during some of the toughest years of my life. So
it only took 19 episodes.
Only 19 episodes. I love you, Daisy Girl. I miss you running heaven over the Rainbow Bridge. And thanks, listeners, for joining us tonight.
Have a good night.
Enjoy your holidays. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life and I Hope You Know by John Worthy Music. And then just as you don't kill that fly, Mason just bopped his microphone. Look, there's like a bleep on the sound waves on my computer. He bleeped. He tried to kill the fly. He missed, y'all.